Okay. Good afternoon. I formally declare open this Planning Committee meeting of Colac Otway Shire Council on the 8th of June 2022. Almighty God, we seek your blessing and guidance in our deliberations on behalf of the people of the Colac Otway Shire. Enable this council's decisions to be those that contribute to the true welfare and betterment of our community. Can I ask that council staff record all those present today? I note that all councillors are present, therefore there are no apologies. I would like to start this afternoon by acknowledging the traditional custodians and lawmakers of this land, their elders past and present, and welcome any descendants here today. I would like to advise that all planning committee meetings are audio recorded and live streamed, with the exception of confidential matters. This includes the public participation sections of meetings. The live stream recording of this afternoon's meeting will be placed on the website as soon as practical. Are there any declarations of interest, please? No. Okay, I propose that we move to confirm the minutes from the Planning Committee meeting held on the 9th of March 2022 and the unscheduled Planning Committee meeting held on the 18th of May 2022. Do I have a mover? Councillor McCracken. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Hart. Is that to be opposed? No. All those in favour? The item's carried 7-0. Okay. Verbal submissions from those applicants and objectors who have confirmed in writing that they wish to speak to their submissions will be heard prior to the consideration of each agenda item. A limit of 5 minutes will apply to each submitter. Okay. Now we move to item 8.1. The purpose of this report is to consider a planning application for a first floor extension to the existing commercial building to provide a bar for the use of the land for the sale and consumption of alcohol, general liquor licence, for a reduction in car parking from the specified rate by 5 car parking spaces, for variations to carriageway and drainage easements, and for the waiver of bicycle parking requirements. We have verbal submissions from an objector, Mr. Luke Mooney of Planning and Property Partners, acting on behalf of Everspring Proprietary Limited by video conference. I can see him now, and then we will hear from the applicant. Okay, we'll start with you, Mr. Mooney.
Thank you, councillors. Hopefully you can all hear me. Perfect. Thank you, councillors, and I appreciate the opportunity to present to you all today. As has been mentioned, my name's Luke Mooney from Planning and Property Partners, and we represent an objector, Eversprings, to this particular application. Eversprings have an interest, importantly, in land that takes the benefit of the carriageway easement, which is proposed to be modified by this proposal, and also more widely in the Polo Bay area. Our client's been involved in this site, or has taken interest in this site dating back to a 2014 VCAT matter, which was referenced in the officer's report, and they also lodged objections to the earlier proposal in October last year, which was refused by council. Our client's concerns with this proposal are really quite discrete, and they relate almost exclusively to the protrusion of the balcony into the public realm beyond the site boundaries, and further limiting or restrictions on the carriageway easement which they take benefit of. If these were matters resolved, in all likelihood we would not be here, we would not be objecting to the proposal. Our client has no in principle issue with the use of the land, the reduction in car parking, and even other works within the site boundaries. So it really is confined to particularly the balcony and that carriageway easement, which, as I said, is proposed to be modified. And it's really those changes which we've sought to have, or we've encouraged the applicant to look at and consider alternatives, both in the 2021 refusal and also in terms of this proposal here. Obviously, the applicant has elected not to make those, or not to engage with those sorts of changes that we've requested of them, which is really the reason why our client has maintained objections to the previous application and also this one. There's obviously been a history to this proposal, as I've mentioned, and a consistent involvement by our client. And they really take the review that with each subsequent application, there's really an effort to undermine the earlier proposals. Obviously, there was the VCAT decision in 2014, which approved an open-style balcony, and then there was the earlier refusal from October last year, as I've mentioned, which was enclosed that balcony and made more of a permanent structure of it, which is their substantive concerns. And in terms of the application that's before Council now, we see as really immaterial changes from this 2021 refusal, which is why we would implore the Council laws to uphold the officer's recommendation to refuse the application. It's really made no substantive effort to resolve the grounds of refusal and the refusal from this council less than 12 months ago. And as I said, there's been no change to policy since that time. There's been no change to the site context since that time. And the only substantive change to the application is a different roof form. It's still an enclosed structure that relies on and borrows from the public amenity. It requires additional supporting infrastructure within the footpath in front of the site, which is obviously an obstacle to pedestrian traffic along the shopping strip there. And importantly, it's one that we see as unsympathetic to the design and development overlay and the character of the area. And in that respect, again, I refer back to the council laws, the officer's report, I beg your pardon, which made similar criticism of the proposal, and hence the reason why they're recommending a refusal of the application. If other options were progressed, as I said, pushing the balcony back into the site boundaries, or at the worst, a modified form where it's more open structured, I suppose they're all options that our client put forward, and we encourage the applicants to take on, but they obviously elected not to. So unlike other protrusions into the public realm along Great Ocean Road, namely balconies associated with residential dwellings, this is essentially a substantially enclosed structure that extends the full breadth of the site with an area, I think, of around about 53 square metres. So it's a substantially enclosed structure that is unsympathetic to the character of the area. And as I said, it's contrary to the design and development overlay, which really seeks to encourage low-scale forms with recessive upper levels. So that's just as an end note, the other substantive issue which our client has is, as I said, the proposal to modify the carriageway easement, which benefits their property to the rear of the site. Again, there's been previous findings on this at the tribunal, and we see that the client's coming back again, the applicant's coming back again with a further proposal to additionally erode the width of that carriageway easement, which at the end of the day is a proprietary right which our client enjoys. It's a proprietary right which the owner of the site acquired it, knowing it's on title, it's clear for everyone to see, and to be seeking to modify it to the detriment of our client, we essentially say is an unreasonable proposition that's been put to council. Thank you, councillors.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Mooney. Are there any questions from councillors for Mr. Mooney? No, there are no questions. Thank you very much. I'll now call on the applicant, Mr. John Ritchies. Thank you. You have 5 minutes, Mr. Ritchies. Thank you.
In response to the previous speaker, all the issues of the carriageway and accessibility through the carriageway have been, I believe, successfully and properly addressed, both by VCAT and this new arrangement in no way further restricts their movement over the carriageway. He talks of a proprietary interest. I don't think he has a proprietary interest. He has a right to cross over that land at any time for any purpose with his clients and visitors to his property. The structure, it might sound as if we're sort of being a little bit pig-headed and difficult and not refusing to change this thing, because what everybody wants us to do is take the roof off it. But this project is unviable without the roof and some enclosure. Apollo Bay suffers from substantial lots of cold, wet, windy weather, and the proposal is considered by the owner of the principal of the project to be unviable without fully protected covering. My comments, basically, which I've written here to address to the councillors, I think in many ways address the same issues about the nature of the structure as the concerns expressed by the previous speaker. The recommendation to refuse this application is based on the grounds of harming the character of the streetscape and township by being roofed and projecting further forward than other balconies. However, the street has no distinctive heritage, building or balcony character that defines the street. It is notable, unfortunately, for its lack of historic and period buildings, and if I may say, generally uninspired architecture. Is it this character that the planners want to preserve? Is this what the town is meant to be? After a recent visit, I have to say the way Port Campbell has developed in recent years leaves Apollo Bay far behind in terms of seaside township character. Just because a balcony is roofed and projects further forward than the other balconies is not sufficient reason to condemn it on the grounds of character. The character of an area is much more complex than this. The neighbouring restaurant's whole facade projects over the pavement, and it is one of the most interesting and attractive buildings in the area. This proposal is for a simple glazed and roofed first floor balcony over an existing veranda, offering a food and drink service in a striking and unusual setting with spectacular views of the harbour and bay. How can this be out of character with a seaside township? If character or the assessment of the character is reflected in the opinions of the community, this project is strongly supported by the community. When asked whether a glazed balcony over the front of George's Cafe would be a good thing for the town, 557 people agreed, 311 being from Apollo Bay. We ask that you reject the officer's recommendation and approve this application. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions for Mr. Ritchie's? No, thank you very much.
Thank you.
For your submission. Okay. Do councillors have any questions of officers? Councillor Costin.
Thank you, Mayor. The other objector, there's only two objections this time, I understand. The other objector raised issues of noise and overlooking. I'm just wondering, are there any grounds for those objections?
Through you, Mayor, we haven't actually included a reason for refusal in the recommendation to councillors relating to noise or overlooking. Basically, the site in question is in the commercial zone, where a residential amenity is cannot be expected to be at the same level as in residential areas. So there has to be an acknowledgement that there will be activities in a commercial area that will cause noise and detriment, and that includes use of commercial premises, loading, unloading, etc. Because of this, as I say, that isn't the concern of officers. Officers' concern is with the physical build form of the front extension, and I should stress it's an extension, not a balcony, and its conflict with policy.
And the second question, if I may. And in terms of our long-term strategic planning in relation to that laneway, do we see commercial vehicles, goods vehicles, continuing to access across the busy footpath, continuing to access that property which already has access from Pascoe Street?
Through you, Mayor, any existing rights for vehicle access would continue to remain. So the existing private property on which the accessway is located has rights of access to the rear car park and unloading area. Those rights would continue. In addition, the carriageway easement rights that are on title for the property to the rear at Pascoe Street would continue. Those are legal rights.
Are there any other? Councillor Hart.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. I just want to make sure I've understood the issue with the carriageway easement properly. I'm reading page 13 of the agenda. From what I understand is VCAT's allowed a reduction in the width of the easement to 4.02 metres previously, and that this would reduce it, this application would reduce it further to 3.5 metre width. Is that a correct understanding? Or if not, what's the correct situation?
Through you, Mayor, that is correct. There is a further reduction beyond the VCAT ruling. It's further reduced by 0.55 of a metre beyond that.
Thanks, Mayor. Why wouldn't that be part of the issue of, you've recommended a refusal, why wouldn't that be part of the refusal? I mean, I don't think it is, maybe I've missed it. Or does council not regard that as a problem?
The reduction in the easement was assessed by council beyond the VCAT determination. Council assessed the standard laneway, the width of the laneway, and a standard vehicle, a working vehicle, and this was also assessed back in 2012 by VCAT when they considered reducing the easement. Taking it a step further to this application now, at 3.5 metres, the width of the easement is not considered to compromise a service vehicle using that easement to the beneficiary at number 30 Pascoe Street. Considering also that when VCAT considered the similar application in 2012, it was acknowledged that the majority of vehicles servicing 30 Pascoe Street would enter from Pascoe Street. However, reducing the easement to 3.5 metres is not considered to compromise the use of that carriageway.
Through you, Mayor, I might just expand on that. VCAT basically looked at whether it caused material detriment in terms of pedestrian and vehicle access. The officer has assessed the width of the access and considers that that would still remain the case. But should you wish, obviously, we could look at an additional reason for refusal based on the reduction in the width of the easement, and we could give you a policy reference relating to variations of easements.
Councillor Hart.
Just on this easement, so how wide is it on the title? Like, my understanding of easements is that the beneficiary would have some reference to having access rights over it.
Through you, Mayor, the carriageway easement is 4.57 metres on title.
So I'm sorry if I may, in practical terms, VCAT's already reduced the usable width previously, and this application, if approved, would reduce it even further.
Through you, Mayor, VCAT agreed to that variation should the development that was then proposed be constructed. Obviously, there's been no variation to the easement physically on title as yet. So, yes, this would be a greater decrease in the width of the carriageway easement.
Are there any other questions? No. Councillors, the officers have provided a recommendation for our consideration. Does any councillor wish to move a motion in relation to this matter? Oh, Councillor Costin.
Thank you, Mayor. I'd like to propose an alternate motion that's outlined on page 27 of our report. Thank you, to issue a permit.
So that's the one up on the screen. Is there a seconder for that motion? Councillor McCracken, is it to be opposed? Councillor Potter. Councillor Costin is the mover.
Thank you, Mayor. It might seem a little strange because I opposed the application in 2021, but This is a different application, a different proposal. The shape of the roof structure has changed. It presents a less imposing addition to the streetscape. There's windows included in the back of the wall behind the balcony, so that when you look at the structure from the Great Ocean Road or from the foreshore, it looks more transparent. To me, and it's a subjective view, as we all know, but this is a less confronting and a more transparent structure than what's previously proposed. And I was also against the previous proposal because it also included a 4 or 5 lot subdivision. I can't remember how many lots, but it did have a proposal to subdivide the balcony off from the structure behind, from the building behind, and that seemed inappropriate to me. This new application doesn't propose that subdivision, so if the subdivision was to go ahead sometime in the future, there would have to be another application. What's also changed my mind is that the number of objections previously was 4 or 5, 4 I think, it's now only 2. We've heard that one objector is concerned about noise and overlooking on the balcony, but there doesn't seem to be any grounds for that objection. It's in a commercial area. The balcony is open to view from the Great Ocean Road already, and the noise issue has been addressed by VCAT. The other objector, who we've heard speak today, raised concerns. They also have a view of the streetscape, but it's a subjective view, as I highlighted before. But I'm concerned about their desire to retain the carriageway access, which allows goods vehicles to cross over the busy Great Ocean Road footpath and travel up that laneway to access a property which already has access from Pascoe Street. It just seems that that easement is not needed anymore. I'm not sure what to do about that legally, but in our structure plan and in our draft community infrastructure plan, we're proposing that this laneway should become something more vibrant, something more exciting. It might even have shops along the side of the laneway, shops that, small shops, the low rent shops that sell mobile phones or something like that, or they might be hole in the wall coffee shops. The easement variation, the liquor licence, the car and bicycle parking reduction, the hours of operation, the noise issues were all addressed by officers and endorsed by VCAT along similar lines in 2014. So I can't see any reason now why we shouldn't approve this current application. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor McCracken is the seconder.
I'll reserve, thanks.
Councillor Potter, you opposed.
Yeah, I did. Thank you, Mayor. Look, I was pleased to see this come back before us, but I was disappointed when I saw it, Mayor. I don't think there was enough work done in relation to the design for the balcony to mitigate the concerns about the overall look of the street. And in my view, it clearly does not fit within the design and development schedule at the Apollo Bay Town Centre, not at all. And recently we had a matter before us in relation to a proposal for a bottle shop in the main street of Apollo Bay, which I opposed then. One of the grounds for my opposition then was changing the amenity and appearance of the street of Apollo Bay, and to be true to that view, that applies to this proposal as well, because clearly this changes the view of that streetscape. Whilst it's not uniform, all those balconies are set back. Some of them are open, and I do support the business idea for what is proposed, but I just do not see how this balcony fits within the design development schedule, and it definitely changes that look of that second story, first story of the street. We've heard from the objector about their concerns over the use of the laneway. VCAT has reduced its size once. Here's an application that reduces it again. Clearly, this affects someone who has the right of way to use that easement, and I think we have to pay attention to them, their view, and the way that this may or may not affect their business. And I also have, whilst the officers didn't raise it, concerns over the car parking waiver, the community infrastructure plan that's being considered. One of the considerations for that is the changing the Great Ocean Road to one way, to widening footpaths and all the rest of it, and spells out quite clearly that we're going to lose car parks if that is adopted. We're a long way from adopting that, but losing car parks is an issue for me, especially in that main part of town where elderly people like to park as close as they can to where they need to do their business, with the chemist not very far away. So I won't be supporting this alternative motion, Mayor.
Thank you. Does any other councillor wish to speak? Councillor Hart.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor, and thank you to the two people who gave a submission today. I agree and echo Councillor Potter's comments about the streetscape, so I'm not going to spend much of my few minutes on that, other than to make that observation. I find it particularly concerning that the planning rules can be used to reduce the practical access through an easement, which is a right on title. It should be a negotiated outcome. I acknowledge and see in the report where VCAT has agreed that the easement can reduce in practical terms to 4.02 metres. That was a reduction of around half a metre. This application reduces that easement further to 3.5 metres, so that's another roughly half a metre. So the more you reduce the size of that easement, the more you reduce the practical access that can occur through it. If a person has an access right, which this is, I don't think planning should be used as a means to curtail another person's rights, and by granting this permit, Council is doing just that. And anyone that relies on any easement should be very concerned about that. If this resolution is lost, I'd foreshadow moving an alternative that would include the easement issue as an additional reason to reject this application. Yes, it has been before VCAT, and VCAT has said the appropriate width can go down to 4.02 metres, and Council's seeking to ignore that and allow it to go further, be further reduced by another half a metre approximately. I think the points raised about car parking are also valid and should be included if there is an opportunity to move a resolution similar to the officer recommendation. That's one of refusal. I think there should be a clause about the parking as well as the issue of the easement. But think very carefully what councillors are doing today if they're allowing planning to be used to erode a person's rights of access, and it is a property right of sorts that exists on a title. That's not how it should be done. It should be done by a negotiated mechanism, and I really think Council should be quite concerned about going against the original VCAT decision and allowing a further half a metre reduction. Every time you do that, you reduce the practical access that can occur on that easement.
Thank you. Does any other councillor wish to speak? Councillor McCracken, you reserved.
Thank you. I just want to touch on a point that was sort of discussed and it was raised in the submissions, that it's about character, and that there's an assertion that this proposal is going to somehow reduce the character of, and therefore the amenity of the streetscape. And when I look at some of the other structures around, and I'm looking, at the officer report, it's on page 19 there, there's 2 buildings that are circled quite clearly that have a similar sort of structure. Now, they don't go as far as, over the walkway, but I mean, at some point in time, we're going to confront this again because more people will want to do this. And Apollo Bay is going to advance in some way in the future. And we want to encourage that. We want growth and prosperity. And this is a really good opportunity to say, look, we actually do support the business community in wanting to expand, because if this extension to the first story doesn't happen, then we know that, according to the applicant, it's not viable as a business. When I look at the character of Collingwood Boulevard there, well, what is actually the character? Is there a specific building type that's there? No, not really. You've got a whole mix of different types. From the pub up one end, which is, a lot older than some of the newer buildings. So there's no really distinctive character here. Like, that's just a fact. So adding this proposal into the mix, you can't say that it adds or detracts from a character because it's mixed anyway. This just adds to that mix. And for me personally, I don't think there's anything particularly offensive about the proposal. It doesn't look particularly ugly. It's tried to be at least sympathetic to other buildings around. And it's going to offer something that may not necessarily be there at the moment. And that's a good thing. So I think it's well worth supporting, and I think we should really think seriously about what happens if we don't support this. What message does it send?
Thank you. Councillor Costin, you have a right of reply.
Thank you, Mayor. Councillor McCracken's quite right. There is no detriment to this particular building when compared to the rest of the streetscape. It's pretty uninteresting and variable built form along there. Some of it's particularly ugly. And this, in my view, and it's a subjective view, I admit, but this would be a positive addition to the streetscape. I thought this would be the main issue, but it seems the easement is also an issue. Now let's think about that easement. Our strategic plan for the future of Apollo Bay requires that to be a pedestrian access, a pedestrian laneway that accesses Pascoe Street through to Great Ocean Road. There is nothing in our strategic planning that talks about vehicle access through there. It's hardly ever used. I can't remember it being used for the last 10 years for vehicle access. In fact, after the COVID lockdowns, it was used during the COVID lockdowns when we still had restrictions on spacing, dining spacing. That outdoor area was filled with tables and umbrellas and chairs. It was used for outdoor dining. It's not a vehicle access that's very frequently used. The Department of Transport have no concerns, and they own the public open space which is over that balcony. You can't really talk about the heritage impacts on the heritage along the street. There is no heritage. So for those reasons, I'd ask councillors to approve this application. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillors, I will now call for a vote. All those in favour? All those against? The item's carried 4-3. Division is called. All those in favour? Councillor Costin, Councillor White, Councillor McCracken, Councillor Bell. All those against? Councillor Hart, Councillor Potter, Councillor Hanson. Thank you. Now we move to item 8.2. The purpose of this report is to consider a planning application for the use and development of land for a dwelling. We've got verbal submissions from the applicant, Sue Spokes. There you go, and you have 5 minutes.
If it's okay, I'll stand and support my client. She's a little bit nervous in this situation.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for your time, councillors. Right, thank you. Good.
Thank you. Go ahead. You have 5 minutes. Thanks.
Sue Spokes, applying for a building permit for, on behalf of my husband and myself, 45 Glen Street, Warrion. We're currently living in Colac at 284 Sinclair Street, South Colac, and we've sold as it's being subdivided for residential purposes. We've owned our property for 16 years, and we feel now is the right time, and due to selling our home, to build out at Warrion, where we are more hands-on with our cattle, rather than driving in and out of Colac to check on cattle, especially during calving season. Calving season can mean 3 to 4 trips out to Warrion on a smooth day. Sometimes we spend hours out there staying in our car through the night, could be all night. When birthing complications occur, we were bringing our cattle in to calve in Colac, but it's really not going to be a viable situation, as will be will be completely built in around where we are. We currently have a registered Brahman stud, so we have quite valuable cows out at Warrion, so we bring our Brahman cows into our home in Sinclair Street South to calve, and once they mother up and everything's running as it should be, we then transport them back out to Warrion. I think I've covered everything really. Yeah.
Okay.
Good.
Thank you.
Thank you for your time.
Just before you go, do councillors have any questions of Mrs. Spokes? Councillor Harp, then Councillor Bell.
Yeah, thank you for coming in today and giving your submission. I don't know if you've... I've got a couple of questions. I think I'll give them all to you at once, and I'm happy to repeat them. The first one, on page 45 on the council agenda, the officers talk about a viable farm being able to earn $270,000 and $300,000 a year income, whereas this one will only, and I say only in sort of inverted commas, will earn $95,000 a year. Do you have any comment on that conclusion that we're being told to rely on the viability of a farming operation, and that's in turn being used to justify whether or not a house should be allowed?
Well, the 95,000 is a starting point. We're hoping to build from that and further increase our Brahman stud. Yes, it's just very difficult to get it to work at the moment, the way it is, and being built in. Yeah.
Councillor Bell.
Thanks, Matt. Thank you, Sue, for your submission. Just in terms of your future management of the proposal of the farm, I guess, and Councillor Hart has probably already touched on it, but I'm just wanting to understand. Clearly, you're a passionate farmer, but have you got a proposed time frame in which you intend on farming that land? I mean, is it something that you plan on doing for a fairly long period of time?
Oh yes. My husband's just retired, and I'm planning on retiring within 12 months, and then we will have that hopefully as our income.
Have you got a follow-up question?
Yes.
Okay.
Thanks, Matt. And thank you for that, Sue. And in terms of your retirement, this I'm assuming would form a fair part of your livability, sort of moving into the future, the farm component.
I don't understand that question, sorry.
So the farm will form a fair part of your income moving forward if you are granted.
Well, hopefully that's the plan, yes. Where we are now, it was rural, but it's going to turn to residential. So we're not going to be able. One of the factors with all of this is that we're not going to be able to bring our cattle, our Brahman cows in to birth in a residential area. It's just not going to.
Thank you, Sue.
Thank you.
Councillor Hart.
Yeah, thank you. There's some recommended conditions if councillors were to seek to grant a permit. It starts on page 57 of the agenda. Have you had a chance to look at those, and do you have any view on those conditions, whether there are any concerns or comments you want to make in relation to those conditions?
Can I answer that?
Yeah, go ahead. Just speak into the microphone if you can, thanks.
They look like fairly standard conditions and we're happy with those, yeah.
Okay. Are there any further questions? Councillor McCracken.
G'day, Sue. One of the reasons I think it might have been mentioned in there is because undertaking this move and making it obviously easier to conduct a farm is also, you mentioned the high value of the stud there and the ability for you to basically be on site and monitor and watch for security purposes. Can you just talk a bit more about that so I get a bit of an understanding about what, is it a high security risk? Is that what's a big worry?
Well, that's always a concern. Yeah. I think that also is an issue. If we were there, we'd be more hands-on, whereas living in Colac and driving back and forth, like at the moment we're feeding cattle every day, so that's another added trip out there. And during calving season, it's you could be out there 3 or 4 times a day or end up staying out there for hours. We've had nights where we've spent in our car waiting or last year we had to call a vet out, and that was at like 9 o'clock at night, and we got home at 3 o'clock in the morning, whereas if we were out there, things could definitely be ran much better than what we're trying to achieve at the moment.
Thanks. My other question is about it's hard to sort of put into words as I'm thinking of it, but there's the thought that, the idea about protecting prime agricultural land. How do you think your move, or as it's proposed here, is going to enhance that use of the land and make it more productive, or whatever the case might be? Is it the fact that you're moving there and you're on site and you can do more, there's less travelling back and forth?
Most definitely.
Is that...
More hands-on,
yeah.
Yes, definitely. We just seem to be wasting so much time, and the price of fuel especially comes into it again, and we just seem to be constantly going back and forth, trying to maintain and manage not only livestock but cattle, and we have a terrific neighbour who rings us if something's not going the way it should, so one of us will go out or both of us will go out. So being there, the care of all the land is one thing. Yes, that's very important to us. We're passionate about all that aspect, but we're also very passionate about livestock and welfare, and but maintaining and looking after our cattle. It's quite a family passion. It's become a very important and passionate thing for our family. Thank you.
Councillor Potter.
Thanks, Mayor. I'm just wondering about the longevity of this enterprise, and I understand you want and need to be living out there, and it's great to be living out of Colac on some land. I understand that. How long do you see this as a long-term venture? Because many people, as they get older, find the need to have to come back into Colac. Here you are moving out of Colac. Do you see this as long-term, or what's the plan for it?
That's a very difficult question to answer. I mean, who can answer that in anyone's situation? I don't think our age is a factor to hold against us. I mean, I'm 64 and I hope to at least work for another 12 months, but I think my husband would be more hands-on and active on the property if he was out there more. But at the moment, we're trying to maintain in town with 3 acres. It's just a small acreage which we were bringing our cattle in to calve. But yeah, we haven't really even considered our age and how long we want to be out there. We hopefully will be out there for quite a number of years.
Okay, are there any more questions? Councillors, the officers have provided a recommendation for our consideration. Does any councillor wish to move a motion in relation to this? Councillor Costin. Can you just speak into your microphone, please? Thank you.
Sorry, Mayor. I'd like to flag the alternate motion, which is shown on page 57. Thanks.
Councillor McCracken will second that. Is that to be opposed?
May I ask a question, please?
Yes.
I just wonder if the mover and seconder would consider changing clause 7 on page 57, clause 7A to 3 years and clause 7B to 5 years. I don't oppose them.
Okay, is that up there? Okay, is there a opposer? Councillor Potter?
Mayor, look, I'll just oppose it for the discussion purpose. I'm interested in what everyone has to think.
Okay. Councillor Costin is the mover.
Thank you, Mayor. Our rural land strategy was prepared back in 2007, so it's a little bit dated now. It follows the Victorian strategy to encourage the retention of productive agricultural land and encourage and discourage non-agricultural uses. While I support the protection of existing large holdings, large farms from subdivision, I struggle with the refusal of new homes on existing small acreages that, for whatever reason, propose a different approach to farming than broad acre farming. The 40 hectare rule seems to be a rather blunt tool that was developed to try and achieve these objectives, to protect agricultural farmland, but it doesn't properly address the legacy of small titles that we find around some of our townships. It was based on the questionable assumption that the only good farm is a full-time, large-scale, broad-acre farm. It doesn't allow for small farmers who might want to run a small farm business as part of a diverse range of incomes. Those owners may or may not choose to supplement their income from other sources. Things have changed a lot over time. Once upon a time, you could only buy Carlton United beer, and now we have all sorts of boutique and niche beers around, and those companies are providing employment in small towns and stimulating the economy. And there is an opportunity for small farming enterprises to do the same, and that seems to be what's happening here, with a proposal to breed Brahman cattle, and the farm management plan does show there would be a reasonable return on that enterprise after a few years, and the officers haven't questioned that farm management plan. So the next question is really, is a dwelling needed on that small farming enterprise? I think it adds to the agricultural output of that land. It allows the owner to be on site full time to check on animal welfare at any time during the night or day, and without the need to commute. They can stand at the kitchen window and look out and see if there's animals down in the paddock. They can hear their dogs barking if there's something untoward happening, or their chooks quacking, or whatever other guard sort of arrangements they have. I've been a small scale farmer, a very unsuccessful one. I've lost animals in the bush that I never found again. I even had a tractor stolen at one stage because I wasn't on site. So I can see the benefit of living where you can see your livestock and protecting against theft. Thank you.
Councillor McCracken is the seconder.
I'll reserve, thank you.
Councillor Potter, you oppose?
Thanks, Mayor. Look, I'm personally in a quandary with this. First of all, I think the officers have absolutely done the right thing, in my view, with the way they presented the report and structured their recommendation that this not be approved, because under the planning rules, it shouldn't be. And there's historically been some subdivisions of farmland that have been carried out, which for the last 20 years would not be allowed, because the state government has recognised the significance and importance to the state of farmland. And this particular property falls in an area of farmland of strategic significance and high capability, and food security in the world and in this country is critical in the years ahead, and we have to keep that in mind. On the other hand, I totally understand why you would want to live there and look after your cattle. I had some acres a bit further west, and it is difficult sometimes to have to commute every day to look after your cattle, but sometimes that's the way it is, and I certainly get that being there and being hands-on can improve the productivity and the welfare of the animals. So I'm interested to listen to other councillors speaking to help me form a view. But again, I think the way the officers presented this in the first place was the correct way to do it. I do know that in the past, officers can sometimes approve some of these applications rather than not approve them, but the way it was rendered to us, I think the officers have done it the right way.
Does any other councillor wish to speak? Councillor Bell.
Thanks, Mayor. Thanks again, Sue, for your submission. This for me, has also been a really difficult one to come to terms with. On the one hand, we have the consideration of the planning scheme, which does outline the intention of the area and how it's farmed, and ensuring that there is a protection and limiting the fragmentation of what is being assessed as really valuable agricultural land. And I agree with that. I think we do have a responsibility to ensure that our land is farmed to the best of its ability and to its potential. And I'll certainly take that on board when making decisions in such situations. Having said that, over the years and over a long period of time, actually, it could be argued that the land has already become quite fragmented, and there's already been a loss of the ability to ensure there's been the ability to farm on a broad scale. I know in areas all around Colac, there's areas zoned that look to ensure the broad acreage and the ability to farm on a larger scale, but we know that has disappeared. And this area is no different. I also think that the sustainability of a farm should not necessarily be judged on the size of the farm. I'm similar to Councillor Potter, and I have farmed and continue to farm in a similar way to yourself, Sue. I've got an area where my home is, which is small acreage, and I've got another area where I do most of my carving, which is a long way away from where I live. And I know the challenges that I've had to confront to deal with that, and it's certainly not ideal. I'd love to have the opportunity to spend more time where my breeding stock are, so I can be there on a regular basis. I do have someone that oversees the operation there to some extent, but it certainly it lacks the ability to provide a good outcome during the calving period. And finally, I suppose having the ability to have a permit for a dwelling on a site, and in this situation, I've got no doubt would enhance your ability to farm that land, and even to enhance the productivity of the land, because you're there more. So naturally, you actually you would become more productive. So I see that as a really strong determining factor, and as a result, I actually support this motion that's in front of us, and having very much understood the challenges that you've gone through, and having weighed up that in reference to the planning scheme, I think it is reasonable to support this.
Thank you. Does any other Councillor Hart?
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. And rather than just repeating the points that have been made, and I think some valid points have been made, I'll just go to some background of this issue of building houses on land's own farm. There seems to be a bit of a myth that you have to have a lot of 40 hectares and that you can't build a house on land in the farm zone farm if it's less than 40 hectares. What really meant by that is that if you have 40 hectares, then a home can be built whether council likes it or not. The 40 hectare rule simply means that council can approve or can refuse to permit a home to be built on lots smaller than 40 hectares. Certainly doesn't mean it's illegal to build a house in that situation. This particular lot's surrounded by similar sized or even smaller lots. It's close to the Warrion Township. And to those who say it's against the zoning, I point out that many areas of Colac Otway are zoned farm and permit a variety of developments. The large petrol station on the east of Colac is on land zoned farm. This applicant has submitted a farm plan. In my view, they shouldn't even be required to submit a farm plan. It's just more costs, more paper shuffling, but I do thank them for providing that document. The officer report says that a viable farm needs to earn $270,000 plus per annum, and this farm will only earn $95,000. It's on page 45 of Council's agenda. To me, that remark's unreasonable. I think that I know a lot of people would survive on less than that amount. And really, if a person applies to build a supermarket, we don't pass judgment on whether or not the supermarket is financially viable. If a person applies to build a petrol station on the edge of Colac, we don't pass judgment on whether or not the petrol station is financially viable, and nor should we. The person who determines the viability of their farm shouldn't be council, it shouldn't be councillors. The only person who should determine that is the farmer. This particular application, in my mind, is really quite straightforward. There are no objections from the public, no objections from Council's Health Department in terms of health of wastewater disposal, no environmental issues. At the risk of being blunt, the only people objecting are Council's Planning Department. I support the right of this applicant to build a home on their land and will vote accordingly.
Thank you. Does any other councillor wish to speak? Councillor White.
Just very quickly. I'm finding it's a really challenging and difficult one to decide what I think about it. I really understand the significance of looking after the farmland and the importance of that, and I really appreciate the work that the planning department have put into this to try and give us enough information on which to make a decision. And I keep coming back to looking at the fragmentation and what is happening around that particular part of our region at the moment. And I'm looking at the map now, and this piece of land is very close to the Warrion Township, and there are other houses scattered around. So for me, trying to take into account all those factors, it is a really difficult decision to make. I can understand that, not being a farmer myself or having ever done that, it would seem that living on site will actually enhance the land and actually make it more productive for what is going on out there already at the moment. So I think taking into account all those factors, it's important to look at that and support it.
Does that? No, that's everyone. Councillor McCracken, you reserved.
Thanks. Look, I'm supportive of this as well. I think in some ways it's complex, but in some ways it's very simple. You've basically got a family. They live, well, on the outskirts of South Colac there. They own land out at Warren. They want to shift there so they can better manage their farm, so they can live on site. Now, we've already heard about the benefits that might bring in terms of the productivity of the land, so I'm not going to go over that argument, but the safety side of things. They're on site, theft is reduced. Think about less traffic movements that are going to be made as a result of this as well, which is going to, I mean, it's a small impact, but it's still a positive impact. But I couldn't endorse Councillor Hart's words stronger in that it is the farmer that comes to a conclusion about the viability of an operation. And that should be the primary consideration about what's viable and what's not. I don't think it is the role of council to go around saying, well, that's not viable, that is, and we're not, we're making judgments on that. I'm not a farmer and I don't pretend to be, but I certainly wouldn't go around saying a supermarket's not viable or a newsagent's not viable because, it doesn't fit into the ticker box planning sort of scheme. The 40 hectare rule, it's not right. And just because we've got a system which isn't perfect doesn't mean we can't make a good decision.
Councillor Costin, you have a right to reply.
Thank you, Mayor. Look, I think we should be embracing these small-scale niche-type farming and not trying to rely on large-scale broadacre farming for our future agricultural production. It's a new way of thinking. There's innovation happening all the time, new technology that helps us along the way. So perhaps our 40-hectare rule is a bit dated. I agree with Councillor McCracken that the viability issue, and Councillor Hart, sorry, the viability issue is something for the farmer to determine. And I think if we embrace that this different way of looking at farming, we've also got to accept that a dwelling on site just adds to that. It stops the owner of that small farm having to commute each day. It allows them to check on their animals at any time during the day or night and make sure that none of them are wandered off in the back of a truck to someone else's property or an abattoir or whatever. The officer report hasn't really made the case that this would cause detriment to the overall net agricultural production of the area or of the state or of Australia. We haven't addressed that. We've just applied some standard rules. If we had some concerns, we would have made some comment on the farm management plan, I'm sure. That's what I would have liked to have seen as part of the argument against this application. So for me, let's apply a bit of common sense and empathy for these new farming, small-scale niche approaches and on-site housing applications, and especially for this one, which is on the outskirts of the Warren Township. And worst case scenario is in the farming enterprise, doesn't make a profit, doesn't work. At least we've provided a healthy and active lifestyle for some people as they're ageing, and we've provided one more house towards solving our housing crisis. Thank you.
Councillors, I'll now call for a vote. All those in favour? The item's carried 6-1. Oh, all those against, that was me. Righto. Okay, now we move to item 8.3. The purpose of this report is to consider a planning application for the use and development of the land for a dwelling and for the construction of agricultural buildings. We've got verbal submissions from the applicant, Mr. Liam McGuan.
Thank you,
Thanks,
councillors.
Liam. You've got 5 minutes.
Yep.
There you go.
Thank you, councillors. I'm Liam McGuan, obviously, same as Sue, a little bit nervous, but I'll give this a go anyway. So I propose for a planning permit on my block of land that I bought in 2014. I'm from a family farm. My parents own the farm and have run the farm alongside me as an employee up until now. And at the minute we are going through succession planning, so trying to transition them into not retirement just yet, but a form that makes it a lot easier for them to live. And that includes me being there as a manager on the farm. And same reasoning as before with Sue, being around the farm gives me better control, and being able to be there obviously is pretty imperative when it comes to busy times of year like calving, harvest season, everything like that. I'm currently renting in Colac, so I travel out every day at 4:30 in the morning, start milking, and then usually finish whatever time at night it is. But for me, I am looking to have calves reared on the property as well. That's part of the transition into the business, and hopefully being able to one day, start to transition the business into my name. In terms of anything else, I think obviously it adjoins my parents' land, so that would be the reasoning for being there, building the house where it is and the sheds where they are. That's virtually the story. I'm really passionate about agriculture, and I want to see it continue. Obviously, over the past probably 3 or 4 years, we've started to see the decline in farmers in general, but more so dairy farmers. The milk pool's starting to shrink, and we're becoming, it's becoming a greater problem in agriculture, as probably we all hear in the news. So it's something that I want to continue on with, and I'm excited about the opportunities that are in agriculture, and this gives me a foot in the door to be able to do that safely and more practically. So that's actually it.
Thank you. Are there any questions for Liam? Councillor Bell, then Councillor Potter.
Thanks, Mayor. Thanks, Liam. Really appreciate your submission. I'm just wondering, are you able to expand a little bit, just really briefly, but on the broader operation of the farm?
Yeah, sorry.
No, that's okay. I think I've got a pretty good understanding, but if you could just spend 20 seconds outlining that or something like that.
So we're a family-run dairy farm, 310 cows, if you want to be precise. We split calving each year, so we do virtually everything ourselves, so tractor work, rearing of calves, everything virtually that you do in dairy farming, we carry out ourselves. And at the minute, it's me, my father and my mother. Mum has started to take a back seat, which is good in terms of the physical work. Dad is at the point where he actually needs a knee replacement, so the physical work has started to wear him down, and we have a milker as well. But between us, that's the labour units we have, and I've started to become hopefully a bit more involved and try and sort of manage the business a bit more. But that's basically it.
Thanks, Liam. Cheers.
Councillor Potter.
Thanks, Mayor. Liam, did you consider a consolidation of your block into your parents' block so you wouldn't have to go through this process?
That was put to us when I first inquired about it, but that includes me asking for 70 acres of my parents' land, which they are still in debt and couldn't afford to do that to just hand me, I can't afford to buy that. And to be able to build a house then after that requires a substantial amount of money. So that consolidation virtually isn't an option unless I ask my parents to gift me 70 acres. So, and with succession and 3 other children in the family, I don't think that they were too willing.
Councillor Potter.
Thanks, Mayor. I've got a couple, but other councillors got their hands up as well. So just following on from that, did you give consideration to building a house on your parents' farm for yourself?
No, never really gave that consideration. But I also, again, don't think it's viable because then I'm building on their land and the actual ownership of it becomes pretty messy in terms of, down the track, trying to sort out all the logistics of it all. So,
Councillor Costin, then Councillor Hart.
Thank you, Mayor. Thanks, Liam. So I'm interested in this succession planning you're talking about, and you've described it as messy. How many brothers and sisters have you got?
I've got 2 brothers and a sister.
Right. And do they own any of the property around there?
My brother owns a house that's surrounding on the edge of the farm. So he owns that outright. And my sister, she doesn't know, and other brother don't own anything or don't have any stake in the business.
And I guess they all have expectations. Thank you.
No worries.
Councillor Hart.
Thanks, Liam, for your presentation. There's, in the council agenda starting at page 79, there's details of suggested conditions if councillors decide to go against the officer recommendation and to grant a permit. Have you had a chance to look at those, or do you have any concerns about them?
Yes, I had a chance to look at them. The only one I would raise a concern with possibly is the 2 years, just in terms of the current climate we're in with the building situation and being able to get things on the go that soon. But I would love to get it started and possibly finished within the 2 years. But I'm not sure whether that's a viable option at the minute.
If I'm reading yours right, you got the recommended one on page 79 is for 3 years plus 5 to finish it. Maybe that's a question for me to ask the officers. I'm not quite sure why you got a different one, but might be covered already.
Yeah, it just was under the draft conditions I seen. It was 2 years.
Oh, okay. I'll check off on that before when we're speaking to the officers. Thanks, Liam.
No worries.
Councillor Potter.
Thanks, Mayor. Liam, with the way you're running the farm at the moment, where do your calves live now? You know, where do you house them and grow them out?
They're currently at the dairy, which is just down the road, but we're very much so running out of space at the dairy. We've extended sheds and had to make room for other things, other arrangements. So having this would make things a lot simpler to get calves away from the dairy and just create a bit less clutter there. So.
Are there any more questions? Councillor Hart.
I've got a question of the officers when we get there, please, Mayor.
Oh, yeah, okay. Thank you. If there's no further questions for Liam, thanks very much, Liam.
Thank you.
Okay, do councillors have any questions for officers? Councillor Hart.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. I just want to make sure I'm reading this correctly. The suggested conditions, which start on page 79, I'm reading that it's already suggesting 3 years to commence and 5 years to finish. Is that correct?
Through you, Mayor, yes, in terms of the attachment, but there were some corrections made to some of the wording without changing the actual intent of any notes and everything. The version on screen is actually the final version, so I would suggest that actually be changed to 3 and 5 years in the expiry condition, rather than It was things around punctuation and just getting clarity in notes that was altered. Other than that, they're identical to what you have. They're reordered in the version on screen.
Okay, thanks. I think if anyone's looking at that, they might want to make sure they're clear on what they mean. Thank you. Thanks, Mayor.
Okay, are there any further? Councillor Potter.
Thanks, Mayor. Look, we have to judge each application on its merits and singly, I suppose. But in recent times, council have approved dwellings to be constructed on acreage under 40 hectares for a various number of different agricultural reasons. Are you able to say, ballpark, how many of those businesses actually commenced, and how many continued if they did commence?
Through you, Mayor, and apologies, I just wanted to have a quick consult with my colleagues as well here. We can think of around 5 that put forward farm management plans or business proposals around agricultural activity on lots between, say, 10 and 15 hectares, ranging from orchards to egg production to equestrian uses. None of those 5 actually commenced. I can think of an equestrian one actually that did commence, with the buildings being erected on site actually before the dwelling. So in the last couple of years, offhand, and this very much is offhand, I would say 1 in 6 maybe has actually commenced as described in an application. And a large number, or most of those lots that didn't commence, were actually put back in the market as rural living lots.
Okay, are there any further questions? Councillor Hart.
Thanks, Mayor. We've received some background report about the history of this site or the area more generally, and I was wondering if you could summarise the significance of that in terms of house lot excisions that have occurred in the past and the thinking that may have allowed that in the past.
Through you, Mayor, one of the things that's quite clear from the aerial images of the area is that there are a lot of what appear to be excised dwellings on the east and west side of Larpent Road. The subject site itself appears to have an excised dwelling, so we had a look back to see what we could find out, and that appears to have occurred in 1989. So it appears that there was a subdivision of the subject site excising a dwelling back in 1989. There are some other small lots that seem to predate that again, because it's not showing on our records. On the west side of Larpent Road, within the family's ownership, there were applications in 2008 and 2010 looking to excise a dwelling after land was purchased to be consolidated with the existing agricultural land holding. In 2008, the application made very clear that the proposal was to excise the dwelling, that it was surplus to agricultural needs, and that they did not want the dwelling for the agricultural land. That was refused on the basis of creating a rural residential lot. The 2010 application actually proposed the consolidation of additional land and reduce the number of small lots and titles in the area. So on balance, that was accepted. So a dwelling was excised from what would be the parents' agricultural land holding at that time. In terms of the other small lots, these, as I say, are quite old. They all predate the rural land strategy and the rural living strategy, which obviously gave very clear guidance for council in terms of where small lots should be created, and looked at, the land use conflicts that can occur the pressures on agricultural land through increased prices for dwellings and land because of allowing residential lots in an area, etc. So it's a very interesting area in terms of its history, but there have been excisions both on this land itself and on surrounding agricultural land historically.
Are there any further questions? Okay, councillors, the officers have provided a recommendation for our consideration. Does any councillor wish to move a motion in relation to this matter? Councillor Costin.
I'd like to propose an alternate motion which is shown on page 79. Thank you, to issue a permit. Thank you.
Is there a seconder? Oh, Councillor McCracken again. Yes, Councillor Hart.
Just to be clear, and there's been a bit of back and forth on that clause about the term. Is this one for 3 and 5 years? Is that what's been moved?
Has it got the...
I just think there needs to be clarity, given that that is an issue that we were discussing just before.
Yeah. Can we just move down a little bit? So are you okay with that, changing the 2 to 3 and the 4 to 5? Yeah, okay. The seconder, Councillor McCracken. Is it to be opposed? Councillor Potter. Councillor Costin is the mover.
Thank you, Mayor. This is very similar to the preceding application that we just agreed to.
We just hold one moment.
Through you, Mayor, before there's any vote on the motion, we've just noticed that if you go to the top of that page, it actually says issue a notice of decision to grant a permit rather than to grant a permit. So just so that as there were no objections, it would actually be a permit rather than a notice of decision to grant a permit. So if that could be changed to to grant a permit. No. But obviously just correcting the resolution before any vote is taken on it. So to grant a permit. Resolves to grant a permit. Apologies for the interruption.
All right, thank you. Okay, Councillor Costin.
Thank you, Mayor. This application's quite similar to the one we just agreed to issue a permit on. The differences are that it's not quite the same niche sort of farming proposal, but it still is a viable farming proposal. There's been a farm management plan prepared to rear calves and raise heifers for dairy farming. That the viability or the farm management plan hasn't been questioned at all by officers. The applicant is in a little bit of a bind here because what we would normally like to see in a consolidation is difficult because of various succession plans there, and I can understand that. I've been through it myself, and he certainly doesn't want to spend his money building a house on his father's property that then might be divided amongst his siblings as well. So it's a bit difficult there. I don't think the officers have made a case that this would be a net detriment to the agricultural output of the area or the state or Australia even. The farm management plan shows what is proposed, and I feel having the son living so close to a working farm at the moment will only make that farm more productive. Thank you.
Councillor McCracken, you reserve. Councillor Potter, you oppose.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. Again, this is a pretty difficult one for myself and for councillors too, I think, in a way. The officers have clearly pointed out to us why, under the state planning rules, this shouldn't happen. This farm is in a area of strategic significance as far as farmland goes and high capability. And I think this one is slightly different to the one that we had before in that there is the adjoining farmland is in the same family name. It is a large working farm, and I would have hoped that the family could have found another way for Liam to be able to build a house to live in. And I think down the track that is possible, especially with succession planning. The granting of a permit for this small block in a rural area gives enormous added value to that block, which down the track might prove attractive to sell, and then that takes it out of the larger area of the farm and reduces, if not eliminates, the ability of that particular block to be used for farming purposes. Liam makes a really, really good point about the milk pool shrinking, and especially in this Shire, and that is a concern. I think it should be a national concern myself. I was only at a Cressy on Friday talking to some farmers, and they just couldn't think of a dairy farmer in that area anymore when years and years ago there used to be everywhere. So I do totally understand that, and I congratulate Liam for wanting to take on the family farm because it's a tough job. It's a 7-day-a-week job, and the conditions aren't flash a lot of the time, and we need people like Liam. But I do have an issue with supporting this particular motion.
Does any Councillor Bell?
Thanks, Mayor, and thank you, Liam, again for your submission. I think, as Councillor McCracken mentioned earlier, I mean, this is on one hand pretty complicated, but on the other it's pretty straightforward as well. It's a slightly different scenario to our previous applicant, although I think we need to draw and consider the outcome of the previous one as well. This particular situation is obviously centred around the parcel of land that Liam owns, and I think what's been attached to that in the form of the farm management plan absolutely justifies the justification, or it justifies reasonable grounds to build a dwelling or to have a permit to build a dwelling. That's one point. I think the other point is too, and it's slightly at arm's length to this particular consideration, but as has been mentioned by Liam and Councillor Potter, I think it has been, in some cases, been declared a crisis within the industry in terms of the number of dairy farmers exiting the industry or that enterprise, which in some regards is surprising given how relatively favourable dairying has been over the last couple of years and seasonally too. You only have to look in the various papers in Victoria and around the country to see that there's a continued exodus of dairy farmers in Victoria and around Australia. So it's a great concern, and I think if we can support through the right means that transition from generation to generation, which would then enable the continuation of dairy farms such as Liam's family, I think that's a great thing. I mean, this is no small farm. This is broadly, the farm is 300 cows, and what happens external to that on the farm is a solid operation. I absolutely believe that without this course of action that Liam is trying to achieve, it they would have trouble managing that farm as the industry needs it, and as our region and the Shire needs it into the future. So I absolutely support the applicant in this case.
Does any other councillor wish to speak? Councillor Hart.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor, and thanks again to Liam for his submission. I do think this one is a bit different to the one we considered earlier. It's surrounded by, it's not surrounded by smaller lots. It's not just on the edge of a town as the other one was. And yes, it is a significant farming operation, but it's a significant farming operation that consists of similar size lots to the one we're considering now. And there's a history to this more broadly to this land where there's been houses excised, and I have to say that I have a concern that the issue here is that if we grant a permit to build a house on this particular lot, that will have effectively, it would be difficult to refuse a permit for all the similar sized lots which collectively make up the sufficient size of the farm, and would of itself create the price pressures that are often talked about. When you have a large farm that consists of a series of properties, many of them well under 40 hectares, around that 12, 14 hectare size, and would make it more difficult to be available for farming potentially if it has that value that each one can have a house on it. On the other hand, someone just wants to build a home and council can choose to grant that permit. I'll be listening very carefully to the arguments of other councillors on this matter, but I really don't think the case is as strong to grant a permit, not from the perspective of allowing a person to build a home, but from the perspective of what it creates and the pressures it creates on the other lots that form this farm, and also the history of this where house lots have been allowed to be excised previously on the basis that it wasn't needed, and we could create a pattern by approving this permit. So I'll be listening carefully to what other councillors have to say, in particular the right of reply.
Does any other councillor wish to speak? Councillor McCracken, you reserved.
I feel like today's almost like a reality TV show. It's farmer wants a permit instead of farmer wants a wife. Although they might, I don't know. It's not up to me. But if we take this thought about trying to protect prime agricultural land, who farms the land? Farmers. How can a farmer farm the land if they've got nowhere to live? Do we expect a farmer to live in town and drive out each day? Or do we expect them to live with their parents? Is that a reasonable expectation? Honestly, it's a no-brainer for me. What's being proposed here in front of us is not something that's particularly invasive. In fact, it fits quite well. You can see that it's set up so that it's designed to increase and enhance the productivity of the land. And we know from what we've heard from the verbal submissions that there is a transition plan here. It's a transition from one, parents to their child, that they want to hand it over. And to keep dairy farmers in the game, this seems like a natural sort of thing to want to support, let alone building a house. I mean, God, how bad would it be if we built a house? We've already got a declared housing crisis. One person comes out here and builds a house and frees up another one in Colac. What a problem that is. It's not a problem at all. I don't know why we would be standing in the way of this, just like we didn't stand in the way of the last one.
Councillor Costin, you have a right of reply.
Thank you, Mayor. As Councillor McCracken said, we should be very supportive of this intergenerational farming. We should actively support it, in my view, and keep our dairy industry going. It's a labour-intensive business, raising of calves and young cows is particularly labour-intensive and needs close supervision. There seems to be a lot made of what might happen if we grant a permit and this property is sold. What will become of it? Will it be taken out of the farming land pool? Well, maybe, but not necessarily. I mean, my experience is that if people move on to an acreage of something of this size, is that they're happy to be surrounded by green, but they don't want to manage that green, so they adjust that out to a farmer for an out paddock. So the only net loss is the area of the house. The farming, the land is still available for farming. In fact, it's even better than that because it's available for farming. It's an out paddock which now has someone living on it to make sure that that they can see whether there is a problem with the animals, and if there's a cow down or something, they're going to ring the person who's adjusting. And again, they're keeping an eye on what happens around the place so that the calves don't go wandering off in the back of a horse float or something like that. So I believe it's something we should be supporting, this intergenerational farming, and there may be a risk, but it's a risk we need to take, I think. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillors, I'll now call for a vote. All those in favour? All those against? The item's carried 4-3. Thank you, councillors. That concludes this Planning Committee meeting of the Colac Otway Shire. I declare this meeting closed.